My name is Emily, and when everything began, I was only 18. I had just graduated from high school and started working at a small bookstore on the outskirts of the city. I dreamed of saving enough money to attend college, to break free into a bigger world where I believed I would finally find my place. The bookstore was quiet, filled with the scent of old pages and coffee drifting in from the shop next door. I loved standing between the tall shelves, letting my fingers trace the worn spines of the books, losing myself in dreams of a life that still seemed so far away. That was where I first saw Mark. He was older, with silver strands running through his dark hair, and there was something about his eyes, tired but warm, that drew me in. He would come in almost every day, sometimes browsing, sometimes buying, but always stopping to chat. At first, it was small talk, the weather, the books, little comments about life. His voice was deep and calm, the kind that made you want to lean in closer. Every time he smiled at me, my heart raced in a way I couldn't control. I was young, naive, craving attention and affection I hadn't really known before. I didn't ask about his family. Deep down, maybe I didn't want to know. I wanted to believe that the way he looked at me meant something real. When he finally asked if I would like to grab a coffee after my shift, I said yes without a second thought. That first coffee led to long conversations. We talked about everything: dreams, fears, books, music. I felt seen in a way I never had before. He listened, really listened, like every word I said mattered. He made me feel special, important, as if I wasn't just another teenage girl with big dreams and no clear path. I fell for him faster than I ever thought possible. He was so different from the boys my age, so certain, so composed. It felt like being pulled into a current too strong to resist. I didn't even try. For a while, it felt perfect, like we existed in a small, secret world that belonged only to us. He never talked about his personal life, and I never asked. I didn't want to risk shattering the fragile bubble we had built. I was happy, or I thought I was, until the day I realized I was late. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Stress, maybe? A late period wasn't unheard of. But as days turned into weeks, dread settled into my bones. One morning, my hands shaking, I took a test in the tiny bathroom of my rented room. The pink lines appeared almost instantly. I sat there, staring at them, feeling the world tilt under me. I was pregnant. I didn't know how to tell him. I didn't even know how to breathe. I finally gathered the courage to meet him at the same coffee shop where it had all started. My voice trembled as I told him. For a long moment, he said nothing, just stared past me at some invisible point on the wall. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. I have a family, Emily, a wife, kids. I can't turn my life upside down. His words hit harder than any physical blow. I felt the ground give way beneath me, felt myself falling into a darkness I hadn't known existed. Everything I believed about us was a lie. He offered money. He offered to help from a distance. But he made it clear he wouldn't be there. Not really. Not the way I needed him to be. I left the coffee shop in a daze, my whole body trembling. I was 18, pregnant, alone, and terrified. I couldn't tell my parents. I couldn't imagine the shame, the disappointment. I rented a tiny room even further from the city centre and picked up extra shifts at a diner. Every dollar I earned, I saved. I started visiting free clinics, reading everything I could about pregnancy, motherhood, survival. Some nights, I cried myself to sleep. My hands curled protectively around my growing belly. Fear was a constant companion, but so was a strange, fierce kind of determination. I wouldn't give up. Not now, not ever. When my daughter was born, I held her against my chest, feeling her tiny heartbeat thudding against mine. I named her Hope, because that was what she was to me. Hope in the face of everything. Hope in the ruins of broken dreams. Hope that maybe, somehow, I could still build a life worth living for her, and for me. Mark became a distant memory, a shadow I no longer needed to chase. Sometimes I saw him in town, his hand resting on the small of his wife's back, laughing with his children. He never looked at me, and I didn't want him to. My life was no longer about him. It was about the small, bright-eyed girl who looked up at me with complete trust, who made me believe that real love, wasn't about promises or fancy words. It was about staying, about fighting, about never giving up, even when the world tried to break you. I worked, studied, raised hope with everything I had. It wasn't easy. Some days, it felt impossible. But every night, when I tucked her into bed, when she curled into me with a sleepy smile, I knew it was all worth it. I was stronger than I ever believed I could be. Because of her, because of us. The years that followed were not kind, but they shaped me in ways I could never have imagined. Raising hope on my own was a battle I fought every single day. Money was always tight. I took on every shift I could, often working late into the night and coming home exhausted. My arms aching, my feet sore, but my heart full every time I heard her giggle in her sleep. In the early days, loneliness clung to me like a second skin. I watched other girls my age go off to college, travel, fall in love. Their lives were full of firsts, of beginnings. Mine felt like it had been set in stone too early, heavy with responsibility. There were days I doubted myself. Days when I sat on the floor of our tiny apartment, surrounded by bills and unopened letters, wondering if I had made a mistake. But then hope would toddle over, her chubby hands reaching for me, her wide, trusting eyes anchoring me to the earth. I learned to live for the small victories, paying the rent on time, finding a few extra dollars to buy her a new book, hearing her first words, watching her take her first steps. Each milestone was a reminder that we were moving forward, even if it was at a crawl. Over time, I built a little life for us. I found a better job as an assistant at a local law office, answering phones and filing paperwork. It wasn't glamorous, but it came with steady hours and, more importantly, health insurance. I enrolled in night classes at the community college, determined to build a future for both of us. That didn't involve scraping by. From paycheck to paycheck, balancing work, school, and motherhood was a delicate, exhausting dance. There were moments when I fell asleep with textbooks open on my lap, Hope curled up beside me with her small hand resting on my arm. I missed events, birthdays, milestones, but every sacrifice felt necessary. A step towards something bigger. Hope grew quickly, and with her. So did I. She had Mark's eyes, sharp and curious. But the rest of her was mine, the stubborn chin, the easy smile, the unbreakable spirit. I never spoke to her about her father. She was too young to understand, and I didn't want her to carry the weight of a man who had chosen absence over love. As the years passed, something unexpected happened. The anger I had once carried toward Mark began to fade. It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly. It was more like acceptance. A quiet understanding that clinging to hatred would only poison what I had worked so hard to build. Hope deserved a mother who wasn't haunted by the past. I owed her that much. By the time I turned 25, our lives looked completely different. We lived in a small, but cozy two-bedroom apartment near the college campus. Hope was thriving, bright, outspoken, full of life. I had earned my associate degree in business administration and was working toward my bachelor's. I was proud of the life we had carved out of nothing but sheer will. It was around that time that I met Daniel. I wasn't looking for love. Truthfully, I had built walls so high around my heart that I wasn't sure anyone could ever get through them. But Daniel was different. He was kind in a quiet, steady way. He didn't sweep me off my feet or whisper grand promises. Instead, he showed up over and over again. He learned Hope's favorite bedtime stories. He helped me fix the leaky faucet in our kitchen. He asked about my classes, my dreams, my fears, and he listened, really listened. I was terrified at first. Loving someone meant opening myself up to the possibility of being broken again. But slowly, carefully, I let Daniel in. He understood that I came as a package deal, that my heart was already split between myself and my daughter. He never tried to compete for space. He simply made more room. The first time Hope called him Daddy by accident, my breath caught in my throat. I waited for him to flinch, to pull away. Instead, he knelt down, looked her in the eyes, and said, "I would be honored to be your daddy, if that's what you want." That night, after Hope fell asleep in his arms, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. I had survived heartbreak, loneliness, poverty, fear. I had survived being abandoned. I had built a life from ashes. And now, standing on the edge of something new, I felt ready to hope again. Ready to believe that maybe, just maybe, love could be safe, could be kind, could be real. Years later, As I watched Hope walk across the stage at her high school graduation, I thought back to the scared, -1-year-old girl sitting alone in a coffee shop with a positive pregnancy test in her pocket. I wanted to tell her that she would be okay, that the world would try to break her, but she would not shatter, that she would find strength she never knew she had, build a life she could be proud of, and raise a daughter who was a living, breathing testament to resilience and hope, that she would find love again not in grand gestures or whispered lies, but in steady hands, patient hearts, and the simple, powerful act of staying. Life with Daniel was nothing like the life I had once dreamed of as a girl standing between dusty shelves at the bookstore. It was better because it was real. We didn't have fairy tale moments or dramatic declarations. We had early mornings and burnt toast, shared glances across a crowded room, inside jokes whispered late at night when Hope was asleep. We had fights to real, raw arguments about bills, parenting, plans for the future. But every fight ended with apologies, with understanding, with the reminder that love wasn't about perfection. It was about choosing each other again and again, even on the hard days. Hope flourished in the home we built. She grew into a fierce, funny, brilliant young woman, the kind of person who lit up every room she entered. She loved art and poetry, dreams swirling around her like golden dust. Watching her chase her passions reminded me of the dreams I had put on hold for so long. It wasn't too late, I realized. It was never too late to begin again. With Danielle's encouragement, I decided to start my own small business, a combination bookstore and coffee shop, just like the one where I had once worked. It felt terrifying and exhilarating all at once, stepping into a world that was entirely my own creation. The day we opened, Hope and Danielle stood beside me, cutting the red ribbon with oversized scissors, laughing and cheering as the little crowd clapped. I looked at them and felt something settle inside, me a peace I had never known before. Not every day was perfect. There were slow months at the store, moments of doubt, unexpected expenses, and the endless challenges that came with running a small business. But through it all, I had people who believed in me. I had built something lasting, not just for myself, but for the little girl who had once needed me to be stronger than my fear. Sometimes I would catch myself wondering about Mark, where he was, what he thought, if he ever thought of me at all. But the thoughts didn't sting anymore. They floated past like old leaves on a river. The man who had once made me feel small no longer held any power over the woman I had become. I didn't need his validation, his regret, or even his acknowledgement. I had created a life filled with love, purpose, and meaning without him. I had everything I needed. Hope went off to college with a scholarship in creative writing, her acceptance letter framed and hung proudly in our living room. The day we dropped her off at the campus dorms, I hugged her tighter than I ever had before, breathing in the scent of her hair, memorizing the weight of her in my arms. She smiled at me, tears in her eyes, and whispered, "I'm going to make you proud, Mom." I wiped my own tears away and said, "You already have." The house felt unbearably quiet without her. Danielle and I would sometimes find ourselves standing in the middle of her empty room, laughing and crying at the same time. It was a new chapter, one I had known was coming, but hadn't been truly prepared for. We filled the silence with new memories, weekend trips we had always put off, long walks with no destination, slow mornings with coffee and newspapers, comfortable in each other's company. Love had taken on a different shape now. It was quieter, deeper, more certain. Sometimes, when I stood behind the counter at my bookstore, sipping coffee and watching the door, I would see young girls come in, books tucked under their arms, hope shining in their eyes. I would smile at them, remembering the girl I used to be. And when they asked for advice about books, about life, I would tell them the truth. That it's okay to fall. It's okay to break. It's okay to be scared. What matters is getting back up, choosing to keep moving forward, even when the road is hard and the night feels endless. Choosing to believe that better days are ahead, because they are, always. One evening, years later, after Hope had graduated and started her first teaching job, we all gathered at the bookstore for a small celebration. Friends, family, customers who had become regulars. Daniel stood beside me, his hand resting lightly on the small of my back, his presence a steady anchor. Hope gave a little speech, thanking everyone for believing in her, for supporting her dreams. When she looked at me, her voice cracked with emotion. "My mom taught me that strength isn't about never falling," she said. "It's about standing back up, over and over again." She gave up everything to give me a chance. And everything I am, I owe to her. I felt tears slipping down my cheeks, but I didn't wipe them away. They were tears of pride, of gratitude, of a life hard won and well lived. That night, after the celebration had ended and the bookstore was empty and silent again, I stood by the window and looked out at the street. The city lights flickered, casting a golden glow over everything. I thought about the long road that had brought me here, the mistakes, the heartbreak, the loneliness, and the love. Always the love. I thought about the girl who had once believed her life was over before it had even begun. And I wanted to whisper to her across time, "Hold on. Your story isn't ending. It's just beginning." Life had broken me once, but it had also rebuilt me, stronger and more whole than I ever thought possible. I had learned that the greatest love stories aren't always the ones you plan. Sometimes they are the ones you fight for, the ones you build brick by brick, day by day, through every setback and every triumph. And sometimes they are the ones you write yourself. The seasons rolled on, quiet and sure as the tide. My bookstore, once a fragile dream clutched in shaking hands, grew into a thriving little cornerstone of the neighborhood. We hosted poetry nights, book signings, charity events. It became more than just a place to buy books. It became a home for stories, for second chances, for beginnings and middles and sometimes bittersweet endings. I loved every moment of it, even the hard ones. Daniel and I celebrated 20 years together with a simple dinner at the same small restaurant where we had once shared our first meal. We laughed about how he had aged his hair now, almost entirely silver. My smile lined with a life well lived. We didn't mourn the passing years. We unearthed them. Each wrinkle, each scar, was proof that we had stayed, that we had chosen each other over and over again. Hope came back into our lives full force when she called one rainy afternoon, her voice trembling with nerves and excitement. She was pregnant. She hadn't planned it, not exactly, but she wasn't afraid. Not like I had been. She had love, support, stability. She had a foundation to build on. I cried when I heard the news, overwhelmed by a tidal wave of emotion. I remembered how alone I had once felt, and I was so fiercely grateful that my daughter would never know that same fear. When Hope gave birth to a beautiful baby girl she named Lily, I held my granddaughter in my arms and felt a part of myself heal that I hadn't even realized was still broken. Watching Hope with her daughter was like watching a miracle unfold. She was patient and gentle but strong, setting boundaries and offering unconditional love. She became the mother I had fought so hard to be. And seeing her in that role filled me with a kind of pride I couldn't put into words. Our home expanded again to make space for Lily's giggles and toddling footsteps. Saturday mornings were spent baking cookies together, the kitchen a chaos of flour and laughter. Daniel built Lily a little reading nook at the bookstore, a tiny kingdom of pillows and fairy lights where she would sit for hours, flipping through picture books. Life was not without its challenges. There were hospital scares, financial worries, the inevitable growing pains that come with any family. But we faced each hardship the way we always had together, hand in hand, heart to heart. I learned to savor the slow moments, the quiet breakfast with Daniel, Hope's late night phone calls just to say hello, Lily's squeals of excitement every time she saw me. These small, ordinary moments built the mosaic of my happiness. One autumn evening, when the trees were burning gold and the air smelled like distant fires, Hope and I sat on the porch, sipping tea. She turned to me suddenly, her eyes serious. "Mom," she said, "do you ever regret it? The way things happened?" I thought about that for a long moment, watching the leaves dance in the fading light. There were times, I admitted softly, when I wished things had been easier, when I wished I had made different choices. But no, I don't regret it, because every step, every fall, every heartbreak brought me here, to you, to Lily, to this life. Hope reached over and squeezed my hand, her own hand now steady and strong. "I'm so proud to be your daughter," she whispered. Tears welled in my eyes, but I didn't look away. I wanted her to see the full weight of my love. "And I am so proud to be your mother," I said. Time passed, as it always does. Lily grew, bright and stubborn and endlessly curious. Daniel and I grew older too. though inside I still sometimes felt like that frightened 18-year-old girl, trying to find her way. We celebrated birthdays, holidays, and ordinary Tuesdays with equal joy. We mourned losses to old friends, aging parents, even beloved pets. Each goodbye carved new spaces in our hearts, spaces that we filled with memories and love. Eventually, Hope opened a bookstore of her own in a neighbouring town, a cosy place filled with light and laughter. She called it Second Chances. On the day of her grand opening, I stood in the back of the crowd, watching her beam with pride, and thought, this is it. This is the legacy. Not the bookstore, not the business, but the courage to start over, the willingness to hope. Daniel and I slowed down as the years went on. He retired first, spending his mornings tending a small vegetable garden and his afternoons fixing up the house with the stubbornness that made me laugh. I scaled back my hours at the bookstore, trusting a capable young manager to carry forward what we had built. We spent long afternoons reading side by side, sipping coffee, holding hands. Some nights we danced in the living room to old records, our move much slower but no less full of love. I often thought about writing down my story, every messy, beautiful chapter, not for fame or money, but for hope, for Lily, for any girl who might one day find herself lost and afraid, thinking her story had ended before it even began. I wanted them to know the truth, that broken things can still be beautiful, that love is not always loud. Sometimes it is a quiet, stubborn thing that chooses you even when you cannot choose yourself, that the future is rarely what you expect, but it can still be breathtakingly good. One night, after Lily had gone to bed during a sleepover, after Daniel had fallen asleep in his chair with the book slipping from his fingers, I sat at the kitchen table and started to write. I wrote about the girl I had been, about the man who had broken my heart and the daughter who had pieced it back together, about the family we had built from the ashes of mistakes and the fierce, fragile hope that had carried us through. I wrote about resilience, about love, about beginnings. I wrote it all, every messy, beautiful part. And when I finished, I looked out the window at the stars, scattered across the velvet sky, and whispered into the night, thank you. Thank you for every heartbreak, every stumble, every long night that led me here. Thank you for the strength I never knew I had. Thank you for the story I had lived and the one still left to tell. The years rolled gently forward, like a slow river carrying us all into new seasons of life. Lily grew tall and graceful, her laughter deeper, her questions sharper. She devoured books faster than I could recommend them and filled her journals with poems and sketches. Sometimes, sitting in the bookstore's cozy corner, I would watch her from behind the counter and see echoes of both myself and hope in her, the fire, the dreams, the quiet strength. Daniel's hair turned fully white, and mine thinned and silvered, but neither of us minded. We had weathered storms fiercer than aging, and we wore our years with the kind of pride you earn only by surviving. Retirement suited us well. We travelled a little, nothing too far, small coastal towns, mountain cabins, lazy weekends by quiet lakes. But mostly, we loved coming home. Home was where our history lived. Home was where Hope and Lily always knew they could find us. Hope married a good man named Michael, kind and steady, who adored her fierce independence and gentle spirit. Their wedding was a simple outdoor affair under an archway of wildflowers. And as I watched her walk down the aisle, radiant in her simple lace dress, Daniel squeezed my hand so tightly I thought he might never let go. We did good, he whispered, and I smiled through my tears because he was right. We had done good. We had broken cycles and built something better. We had given her a future bright with choices. Lily grew into a young woman so quickly. It seemed like I blinked and missed whole years. She went off to college, studying literature and education, dreaming of one day running her own bookstore and teaching poetry to children who needed stories as much as they needed air. The house grew quieter again after Lily left, but it was a peaceful quiet. A quiet filled with memories and the soft knowledge that life continued to unfold, beautiful and unhurried. Daniel and I grew older still, our steps slower, our conversations softer. We spent afternoons sitting on the porch, hands entwined, speaking in the shorthand of a lifetime of love. There were health scares, hospital visits, and the slow but certain fading that comes with age. And through it all, we remained each other's constant. One winter, Daniel fell ill with a fierce pneumonia that took him from me faster than I could accept. One day he was beside me, laughing at some memory of our youth, and the next he was slipping away in a hospital bed, his hand still reaching for mine even as his strength failed. I held his hand until the very end, whispering all the love I carried in my heart, all the gratitude, all the memories. When he took his final breath, I felt something break inside me, a deep, aching rift, but also a strange, fierce peace. He had been mine, truly and wholly, and I had been his. We had lived every day of our love story. I mourned him deeply, and I still do. Some mornings, I wake reaching for him, only to find the bed beside me cool and empty. Some days, I catch a glimpse of him in the garden or hear his voice in my dreams. Grief never really leaves. It simply changes shape. But even in my sorrow, I feel him with me, steady as ever. Lily moved back for a time, to help me with the bookstore and the house, to grieve alongside me. We spent long evenings talking about Daniel, about life, about everything and nothing. Eventually, she moved forward with her own life as she should, and I cheered her on with all the love my heart could hold. Hope and Michael visited often, bringing laughter and warmth with them. Their family grew to more grandchildren added to the chorus of life bustling around me. I became the grandmother who told stories, who baked cookies, who kept a magic corner of the world alive with books and wonder. On my 75th birthday, the family threw a surprise party at the bookstore. I walked in to find the place packed with friends, family, old customers, and even former employees. There were flowers and streamers and a giant banner that read, "To the woman who built dreams from dust." I cried openly, unashamedly, as I hugged everyone, as I saw the life that had unfolded from one young girl's trembling hope. Hope stood up to give a speech, her voice strong and full of emotion. "My mother taught me that the end is never the end," she said. "That sometimes the worst things that happen to us plant the seeds for the most beautiful chapters of our lives." She taught me to be brave, to believe in second chances, and to love fiercely, even when it hurts. Everything I am, I owe to her courage. I could hardly breathe through my tears, overwhelmed with love and gratitude. When the party wound down and the guests had gone home, I stood alone in the bookstore, bathed in the soft golden light of the late evening. I ran my fingers along the spines of the books, each one a promise of another world, another story. I thought about the girl I'd been, about the woman I had become, about the journey between the two. I whispered a quiet thank you to the universe, to Daniel, to Hope, to Lily, to myself, for surviving, for believing, for starting again and again, no matter how many times life demanded it. I knew my time was beginning to wane. I could feel it in my bones, in the way the days slipped by faster and the nights grew longer. But I wasn't afraid. I had lived fully, loved deeply, and left pieces of my heart in 100 beautiful places. I had no unfinished chapters, no regrets. When my time comes, I hope it finds me here, surrounded by books and the hum of life, dreaming of all the stories still left to be told. Because in the end, that's what life is, 1,000 stories woven together, messy and imperfect and breathtakingly beautiful. And this story, my story, was everything I had ever hoped it would be. In the quiet months that followed my 75th birthday, I found myself returning again and again to the idea of writing everything down. Not just bits and pieces like before, but the whole story, the heartbreak, the mistakes, the love, the second chances. I wanted to leave it behind, not as a monument to myself, but as a map for those who might someday feel as lost as I once had. So every morning after breakfast, I would sit by the window, with a notebook on my lap and a steaming cup of coffee by my side. Sometimes the words came easily, sometimes they didn't, but I wrote anyway, line after line, page after page. My memories spilling out in no particular order, messy and raw and real. I wrote about my childhood, about my parents and the heavy silences that filled our home. I wrote about the day I met him, the man who would change everything, and the way my world tilted on its axis without me even realizing it. I wrote about the betrayal, the fear, the loneliness that followed. And then, with trembling hands, I wrote about Hope, about the way she saved me without even knowing it, about Daniel, about love found in the ruins, about building a life brick by brick, even when it felt impossible, about finding joy in the smallest moments. I wrote through the seasons, my handwriting growing shakier, but my spirit steady. Hope and Lily knew what I was doing. They supported me without asking too many questions, giving me the space and time I needed. Sometimes Lily would sit with me, reading quietly, her presence a silent comfort. By the time I finished, the notebook was thick and worn, the ink smudged in places where my tears had fallen. I thought about editing it, about polishing the words, but decided against it. Life wasn't polished. It was rough-edged, imperfect, beautiful in its flaws. So I left the story exactly as it was, honest and real. I handed the notebook to Hope one sunny afternoon as we sat together on the porch. She looked at me with wide, questioning eyes. "This is yours now," I said simply. "Do with it what you will." She pressed it to her chest like a sacred thing and nodded, tears shining in her eyes. I knew she would take care of it. I didn't need to say more. Life continued its slow, inevitable march. I grew weaker, my body betraying me in small ways at first, then larger ones. There were more hospital visits, more days spent in bed, but there was also laughter and visits from friends, and the sweet chaos of grandchildren underfoot. There were quiet afternoons spent listening to Lily read aloud from new books she had discovered, her voice weaving magic through the sunlit rooms. I was never alone. Love wrapped itself around me, steady and warm. One evening, as the sky burned pink and gold outside my window, I closed my eyes and felt an overwhelming sense of peace. I thought about Daniel, about the life we had built, about the love that had carried me through every storm. I whispered his name, and for a moment, I swear I felt his hand in mine. I slipped away quietly, with no fear, no regrets, only gratitude. They say you can't take anything with you when you go, but I disagree. I took every laugh, every tear, every moment of love. I took my story, and I left it behind, too, in the hands of those who would carry it forward. After I was gone, Hope and Lily took the notebook and turned it into a book. They worked late into the night, transcribing my messy handwriting, adding little notes and memories of their own. They found a small local publisher who believed in the story, not because it was perfect, but because it was true. When the book was finally printed, they held a launch party at the bookstore, now a community landmark loved by many. Friends, neighbours, and strangers came to celebrate, to hear excerpts read aloud, to share their own stories sparked by mine. The book was called Second Chances, not just because of the bookstore or the life I had rebuilt, but because it was the thread that had run through everything. The belief that no matter how broken things seemed, there was always a way forward. Lily gave a speech at the launch, her voice strong and sure. "This story isn't just about my grandmother," she said. "It's about all of us. It's about surviving the unthinkable. It's about finding light in the darkest places. It's about choosing love, again and again, even when it's hard." Her story is our story now. I imagine, somewhere beyond the veil of this world. I was sitting among them, smiling, my heart full. The bookstore continued to thrive, passed from hand to hand, each generation adding their own chapter to its history. Hope retired eventually, and Lily took over, bringing fresh energy and new dreams to the old, beloved space. They kept my reading nook just as it had always been, a sanctuary for any soul seeking a little magic. Years passed, new stories unfolded, but sometimes, when the light hit just right and the air was thick with the scent of old paper and dreams, people said they could feel something or someone smiling in the corner of the store, whispering, "Begin again." And so they did, over and over, as long as there were stories to tell. Years later, long after I'd become a memory stitched into the lives of those I loved, a little girl wandered into the bookstore. Her hair was a tumble of wild curls, her eyes wide with wonder. She ran her fingers along the rows of books, breathing in the scent of old pages and adventure. She found the reading nook tucked in the corner, still warm with the spirit of countless dreamers before her. On a low shelf within her reach, she pulled out a warm copy of Second Chances. The cover was simple, elegant, the title embossed in gold that had faded a little with time. She sat cross-legged in the nook, the book heavy in her small hands, and began to read. As she turned the pages, something stirred in the air, a whisper of laughter, a faint scent of lavender and old coffee. She felt it, though she couldn't name it, a presence, a kindness, a love so deep it filled the room. It wrapped around her like a warm blanket, encouraging her, daring her to dream, to believe in her own story. She read until the sun dipped low and the bookstore lights flickered on. When her mother came to find her, the girl looked up with shining eyes. "Someday," she said softly, clutching the book to her chest, "I'm going to tell my own story too." Her mother smiled and took her hand, and together they walked out into the cool evening, the bell above the bookstore door chiming softly behind them. Inside, in the quiet, the old bookstore settled back into itself. The shelves whispered and the air shimmered with memories, with the endless, unstoppable magic of second chances. And somewhere, in some place just beyond time, I smiled and whispered back, "I'm listening."